Welcome, fans, friends, and families. We are so excited for you to be here today. I am here with KJ Kordick.
And I'm here with Ross Greenberg.
And we are blessed to have three giants of the WWE wrestling in the studio with us. We have the legendary, the great, the champion, the WWE Hall of Famer, Larry Zbyszko.
Thank you.
That was good. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Our guy who does announcing, he should be afraid. And then with him today is the King of Connecticut, our friend Matt. He's in the house. And lastly, but not least, Jake Shannon.
Awesome.
Welcome to the show.
Really excited to have you on the show today. So I have some really great questions for you today to ask. So one of the things that I'm really curious about is when you're in the WWE or the AWA, when you're in those organizations and doing what you do, you kind of have a character that you get known for, the type of wrestler that you are, a persona, if you will. And a lot of times they refer to this as a kayfabe. This is your persona. It's special to you. And sometimes they change depending on which side of things, whether you're a face character or a heel character. So what I want to ask you, the first question I'm going to ask you is, do you stay in that kayfabe character all the time? Is there certain people that you don't do that around? Or once you're not doing the wrestling, maybe you don't bother doing that at all. I'm really curious what you gentlemen have to say.
Well, who are you asking?
Larry, we want to know if you're in character. We know Matthew's. I got a story about that.
Let's start with Larry. Larry, you first.
Well, you know what? Yeah, I've probably been around in there the longest. But I'm not sure what you said, kayfabbing.
Kayfabe. Your wrestling character.
Well, there was a term called kayfabe.
Right,
yeah.
I'm trying here.
But it's not that important. But what happened was, back in the old days when professional wrestling hit TV and got over, and it always drew ratings, it was a show about good and evil. And it was disguised as this amazing athletic event called professional wrestling, where you want to see the good guys beat the bad guys. And that was the basic motivation for people getting into the characters, because the good guys would do interviews and talk and wrestle. They wouldn't cheat. And the bad guys were the opposite. They talk like buttholes, cuss everybody out, and cheat. So it was an easy distinction. And it's night and day from what you see today on the WWE and that. The WWE has become a great company. And it is what it says it is. It's sports entertainment, and they got amazing athletes, and they're doing what the announcers call it, great performances. They're not shooting. It's a great performance, and it is. They're amazing athletes.
Nice. So, Matt, how about you? How do you feel about that? Your kayfabe persona, kayfabe persona.
Okay, for us non-wrestlers, it's kayfabe.
Babe.
Which means it's like that's what your character development name is.
No. Listen. Think of it this way. Back in the day, pro wrestling, it was like the mafia. It was like an inside thing, man. Like only the inside guys knew that it was. And I'm going to use this word, and it's not meant in offense because it's important what I'm going to say. That it was fake. Obviously these guys are breaking bones. It's tough. It's a tough thing, but it's scripted, right? And so, but it wasn't until the 80s when Vince McMahon said, no, it's all theatrical, that it was actually, a lot of people thought it was real.
Oh, yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
So kayfabe is the word that was used to describe the language that the carnies used when somebody who was not on the inside showed up. How would you say? Do you know Pig Latin?
Oh God, I can't even speak English right.
Okay. Do you know Pig Latin? Do you know Pig Latin? How would you say fake in Pig Latin?
Facabe?
Kayfabe.
Kayfabe. Oh, right, because you switched the vowels. Consonants.
Fiazabe, that's Carney.
Yes. There we go. So there's this language of Carney that was spoken, and now is the kayfabe, and only the people who were on the Carney side, meaning carnivals, because these were originally part of a traveling show of the carnival, because that was the form of entertainment in the 19th century, right before TV. Well, that was the culture in which professional wrestling, as we know it today, WWE style professional wrestling, was developed. And so this idea of kayfabe was keeping it secret that this was scripted and not a legitimate contest. Now, Vince went one way and said, let's just lean into this, Vince McMahon Jr., let's lean into this and admit that it's theatrical in the 80s. What we're trying to do with Shoot Pro Wrestling is lean the other way and say, let's take the theatrics out and make it a legitimate contest again, to where real athletes contest under the rules of professional wrestling. And it's real winners.
They still be doing the flips and all that stuff. I mean, because let's face it, in theatrical wrestling, there is. I mean, it is a sport because you're doing. Stuff.
KJ, let me chime in here because I was asked the question.
I'll chime in.
I haven't been able to speak.
King of Connecticut.
I haven't been able to get a word in here. All right, so the king is speaking now, and I'm going to tell you this. This is not a stunt show. This is not a freak show. This is not a burlesque show. Shoot Pro Wrestling is what it says on the marquee. It's the pure sport of wrestling, and it's pure wrestling. And as far as gimmicks go, KJ, you had the distinct pleasure of hanging out with me when we were working together. And the king always lives his gimmick.
Yeah, I know that for sure. But we won't get into that. He was one of our best commentators. But he liked those ring girls too much, so we had to get rid of them.
We could probably tell KJ I had the distinct pleasure of working with Sonny Ono, kickboxer and WCW veteran, as well as Shoney Carter, UFC legend there in the great state of Iowa. And the ring announcer quit, and I took the mic. And I kept the crowd electrified, but I also kept the ring girls quite electrified, KJ. And I was a younger man back then, and yes, I lived.
I mean, we weren't that bad. It's just a very clean cut. And, Matthew, he did a great job for us. I cannot ever say that. And Matthew, people don't know this, but Matthew was like one of the first people that actually helped me in my media career when I transferred from my career in media and DJing and all the stuff I was doing with music. And so, I mean, I can never forget that because you were there for me. We did the award-winning Miller Theater. Remember
Miller Theater, Augusta, Georgia. They put over $4 million into that facility, renovated. It was beautiful, and I've got to say, was a world-class organization for me to broadcast for. I got to broadcast as well alongside boxing legend Merciless Ray Mercer, and that's why I'm so excited about this. About bringing the Shoot Pro Wrestling, and I want to make sure that I make this distinction clear. Shoot Pro Wrestling is, as the word says, shoot, which is 100% real, 100% legitimate, and it's sort of where the UFC, amateur wrestling, and professional wrestling all meet, all come together. And just to kind of break it down for the fans, because a lot of the fans that are listening might be a little confused because we're going in a lot of different directions. The matches consist of 3 5-minute rounds, best of 3 falls, and win by pin or submission. And we're getting ready we've had great events in the past in Denver, Colorado. I was out there in South Dakota at the Skydancer Casino for that event, and we're bringing it to the City of Sin, to Las Vegas. I know Larry's really excited to join us in Las Vegas this coming weekend. He was out there broadcasting for ESPN and AWA, and we are bringing it to Las Vegas this coming weekend with a 2-weight class tournament, under 60 kilogram and over 60 kilogram. And we have elite athletes from the amateur wrestling mat, the collegiate mat, the MMA cage, and the grappling stage, all coming together to compete for $1,000 prize for each.
And you're filming that at CATCHCON.
And we are broadcasting that as a series of shows. There's also going to be an Airbnb where the competitors are staying, and we are going to have many shows out of this. And it is going to be my absolute honor to call the matches, of course, with Jake, but also with the living legend, Larry Zbyszko. Larry went from the amateur wrestling mats in Pennsylvania to the professional wrestling ring to the broadcast booth. And I have said it many times, Larry was the very best to ever go from the ring to the broadcast booth, and the height of WCW when they were beating WWE head-to-head in the ratings. So we are very excited to announce the living legend, Larry Zbyszko, joining our team, our president, KJ, a man you know very well, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich, the president of Shoot Pro. We also have UFC World Champion Frank Shamrock going to be joining us this weekend. Guinness Book of Records holder. We talked about folks coming from the amateur wrestling mat. That's my sport. That's Larry's sport. That's Jake's sport. Amateur wrestling first and foremost. We have the king of pins from the Guinness Book of World Records. Most pins, Wade Chalice. Also going to be there for the coaching camp and the tournaments. So CATCHCON this coming weekend, Las Vegas, Nevada. Man, this event is going to be awesome. And I am so excited to get out there to Las Vegas.
Wow, that sounds super exciting. Thank you so much, King. So let me ask this. Jake, what do you feel is the main difference between AWA and WWE?
Well, okay. So, first of all, we're talking about old. Well, WWE is still a current promotion, but AWA is kind of a promotion that was, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. This was Vern Gagne's promotion.
Yeah,
AWA.
this was Vern. Yeah, they shut down like in 1990. Finally, they couldn't compete with the new era of cable, national television and pay-per-view, which was just starting.
Yeah, and so to your question directly, I think maybe a more exciting question might be, what is the difference, say, and again, I think, we started this off with a discussion of terminology, right? Like, so what is kayfabe? Well, one of the words, look how great Matt does as an announcer. I mean, obviously KJ knows that, and we're turning the rest of the world onto Matt. But he mentioned something, and it's the name of our promotion, and it's shoot, right? So shoot is another term that has a specific meaning in the professional wrestling world. And Larry's got great stories of when he had to shoot and actually injure people when he was a professional wrestler. And the idea is there's this dichotomy between a work and a shoot. A work in pro wrestling is basically the theatrical outcome where somebody says, hey, you're going to win. I'm going to win with this, that, or the other thing. And that's called a work. Okay. It's a preordained outcome. However, sometimes two wrestlers get in there and they may not like each other, or one goes in there with the idea to work and the other guy says, screw it. I'm going to just beat you because I know I can beat you, and I'm not going to participate in this theatrical thing, and I'm going to take the title. That's called a double cross. But if you're going to really wrestle for real, that's called a shoot. So that's why we call our promotion Shoot Pro Wrestling. It means something to the wrestling fan. They understand, oh, holy crap, this is more like the UFC. Although one thing that Matt, in his fantastic announcing there just a moment ago, we are having two divisions, right? We're having an over 80 kilo and under 80 kilo singles division, but we're also adding a tag team division, legitimate competitive tag team wrestling, which we were the first to ever do it. And we're doing it again at this one, and again $1,000 to the winning team of that. So there's $3,000 on the line of prize money.
This
Second
weekend?
place,
This is all going on this weekend.
That's right, in Vegas.
Wow.
And I didn't even know that. I knew about the under 80 kilogram and over 80 kilogram. I knew we were going to be calling the action for that. I didn't know about this tag team. So this weekend, this coming weekend in Las Vegas is going to be epic.
Epic.
Well, the thing I want to share about the tag team that's wild, and for anybody that's interested, what the hell does that actually look like? A real tag team match, like that, where the guys are actually trying to go after each other. If you go to shootprowrestling.com, just like it sounds, shootprowrestling.com, we have our first episode up there so people can watch. And there's all kinds of great tag team action. And the thing that's wild about it is literally there are 4 men. You have to tag your guy in. But what makes it like a street fight is that if I'm wrestling, say me and Matt are wrestling, and Larry's in the corner, and I get close enough, and Larry tags me or I tag Larry, he's my partner, we could both double team Matt for 15 seconds. 2-on-1.
Wow.
It's wild.
And you all, and you know, the cool thing is there's a best of show that we put together, and it consists of matches from our Denver shows and the last show in South Dakota. So if folks listening are really intrigued and they want to see what this looks like, they can go to shootprowrestling.com, and on the main page is a best of show. And I really encourage listeners, if we piqued your interest, and I hope we have, go to the website, go to shootprowrestling.com, and check out that best of show, because it'll tell you what we're all about, and it's only getting better.
Now, speaking of tag team matches, Larry, you had someone who's part of your tag team. It was Terry Garea, right? That was a very good
Tony Garea.
Tony Garea.
Tony, look, I'm doing really great tonight. Tony Garea.
Tony Garea.
We're learning.
Tony Garea, I believe, lives right around the corner from me here in Florida, because I saw him actually, not to get too much in the weeds, but the widow of Bruiser Brody is good friends with him. And I do a lot of commentaries and stuff for a really popular channel that basically does pro wrestling, the Hannibal TV.
Hannibal TV!
Yeah, you know,
I love Hannibal TV! I love it!
And I was at a fan fest with them in Daytona Beach a few years ago, and I know I was talking to Tony Garea, and he lived right near Palm. I think he may live in the same town.
By Cocoa.
By Cocoa. Oh, he's down by Cocoa Beach. Okay, yeah.
Tony's got 2 places. He lives in Connecticut, and then he's got another place in Cocoa.
Nice. That's the
nice
snowbird. That's the way. That's the best way to be.
Don't tell him I called him Terry. But so
you were going to ask me something. I forgot what it was.
Yeah. Well, that was it. That was a tag team. You were tag team with him back in your career, right?
Yeah. Well, when I very first started in 1973, Bruno was helping me along, and I tag teamed with Garea because it gave me a chance to gain experience with someone who was there a couple years before, whatever. And then he sent me to Vancouver, Bruno, for some 6 months. So I got some experience. So when I got in the ring back in the WWF, then Bruno would say, they would announce me as Bruno's protege. But now I had a lot more knowledge of, professional wrestling and what to do and my character and all that stuff.
Well,
so Tony was a great guy. We had a great time together.
You mentioned Bruno Sammartino. in 2015, he nominated you for an award.
Well, he inducted me.
They inducted you into the Wrestling Hall of Fame.
The WWE Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Hall of Fame.
Wow.
In 2015.
That's a big deal.
Well, it was, and it was it was like a dream come true to me. I could tell you some weird stories, but we won't waste too much time. But
No, tell us a story.
Here's the weird part. When I was a kid, I moved to Pittsburgh when I was like 12. My dad worked for U.S. Steel as a tax accountant thing. So we moved to Pittsburgh. I was 12, starting 8th grade. It was the first time I could see professional wrestling, as growing up. And I fell in love with it. So long story short, I started wrestling amateurs because I wanted to be a pro. Off wrestling season, I did martial arts, improved the wrestling ability and all that. And the weird thing that gives me goosebumps today, sometime there when I was like 12 years old, and Bruno was my hero, my dad, the family went to church. And I'm sitting in a pew in this little St. Sebastian little church in the North Hills of Pittsburgh. And I look next to me, and there's this big broken nose and these ears that look like cauliflower all beat up, this big head. I'm going, oh my God, I'm sitting next to Bruno, my hero. And a long story short, he became my mentor, helped me out, everything went great. And then 50 years later, in the very same place after Bruno died, I went to his funeral in Pittsburgh, and his funeral was at that same little St. Sebastian's church. Wow. And I was like in the same row. So it was like the place I met him the very first time was the place that I'm going to ever be with him for the very last time.
Wow,
after 50 years. It was beyond coincidence.
Wow.
It was a
Talk about
dream
full
meant to happen.
circle.
When he inducted me in the Hall of Fame, and again, WWE is a great company. They got millions of followers, globally. And I think a lot of these fans, they're going to love wrestling. I mean, it's great entertainment. And it's what the announcers say, they're going to put on a great performance. And they do. They're crashing through tables and flying around. But when they watch Shoot Pro, they're going to see the difference right away because there's no flying around. No one's doing backflips and crashing into steel chairs. This is a real ancient sport, popular with the Egyptian Empire thousands of years ago. Then it became popular with the Roman Empire, and it was the Romans who turned the art of shoot wrestling, real wrestling, into really a scientific way of knowing how your joints work. They could break your arm. They could pop your shoulder out of place. They could break your neck, pop your knee out. The competition turned into a real close to because if you put the sleeper on too long, you're not going to wake up. So what Shoot Pro is really a sport thousands of years old that hasn't been seen for thousands of years. This is real submission wrestling, no punches, no kicks. And you look at different sports. I mean, boxers have the best hands, and you got martial arts guys with hands, punching and kicking, jiu-jitsu takedowns and some locks. But none of them really go into submission wrestling. There's a little punching, a little kicking. They're working on different things where a professional top-notch shooter only works on how to hurt you, how to hook you, how to pop a joint out, how to break your arm, how to put on a grip that's unbreakable. That's all science of anatomy, and it's an art. And I think once people see the difference and go, oh my God, because you're going to have a winner. And unfortunately, sometimes you're going to have someone on their way to the emergency room. This is not a show.
That's only if Matt liked you.
Right?
And I gotta tell you, like what Larry said is so true. And we know that there's grappling, there's jiu-jitsu, Jake and I competed in the grappling, the no-gi stuff. But the difference with this, like Larry said, is it's that pin and submission. It makes it so much more exciting because a lot of times these jiu-jitsu matches, the no-gi jiu-jitsu, is like a snooze fest because of the guys being on their back in the guard. In this, because of the rule set, it forces the action. The catch wrestling rule set, like Larry said, and the history of combat sports and the history of grappling in America. I know Jake as an author has done some great books like Say Uncle. I did a book years ago with Eric Paulson where we chronicled the history of grappling going back to the Evan Lewis, the original Strangler, Martin Farmer Burns, going back to the Gotch Hackenschmidt days, going back to the Carnies. And the reason that I was so passionate about this, and Jake knows this, is because coming from wrestling, from amateur wrestling, I met a gentleman when I was doing the submission grappling who became like a second father to me, Billy Wicks. And he came out of the Carnies. And he was a pro wrestler in Memphis, but he had wrestled in the Carnies, taking on all comers. He's since passed now. But a lot of the stuff that I learned from him, and then he sent me down to stay with Frankie Kane, the great Mephisto, who was a friend of his who also came out of the Carnies, is what I used and what I taught to guys in grappling and MMA, in coaching, and still do when I coach now. And Jake's the same way. And Larry having that great history coming from the amateur wrestling mat, Penn State wrestling scholarship, and then he gets into pro wrestling. He's Bruno's protege, and Larry shared with us some great stories about an old British shooter. So we have such a history ourselves, Jake, myself, and Larry, in this. That's why we're so excited about it. So, Jake, Larry, you want to tell KJ the story of the British shooter that you met and that taught you the hooks when you got into the pro wrestling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell us.
Well, KJ, sweetie, honey, baby, chicky, sweetie.
I want to know what you did. I want to know.
You know what? Like when I first started, Bruno, I was working out with Bruno and did his workout and got the Bruno chest, and I benched 465 and a half pounds was my record. I weighed 250 out of college, and he sent me to Vancouver, British Columbia, way across the country, where no one would see me on TV because all the publicity came out of New York in those days with the magazines, Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all that. So I could drive across, and I get to Vancouver, and I'm working for Gene Kaninsky for 5-6 months, whatever it was. But there was a guy there, a little older guy from England, a town called Wigan. And there was an old saying, if you're a biggin, you came from Wigan. And Wigan was a place that had a school for shooters that taught guys how to hurt people for real, So when I got there, there was this guy, a little older, didn't have any money, didn't look scary. Like a normal guy. His name was John Foley, and he was staying in the room next to my room. And I said, I tell you what, John, I felt sorry for the guy. I said, you can ride with me. I'll drive to the towns, and I won't charge you trans, because the guys would charge each other a pitch-in for gas. And I said, you can come with me. I'll help you out for free. Don't worry about it. And he was grateful and said, well, I'll tell you what, let's get there a little early, Larry, and we'll go in the ring and I'll show you some stuff. So we'd get there early and get in the ring, and John would show me how to shoot. There's an art and a science to it. The art part is, these old shooters would set traps, and they'd have their hands up and one of their legs out. They called it the sugar foot. And it would look like, especially the amateurs, let me leg dive this idiot. Boom, but they're waiting for you. And when you came in, if you led with your head, they'd front face lock you, front chancery on you and break your neck. if you were off to the side, they do the Brock Lesnar, arm bar thing. They pop your shoulder out. And he taught me a lot of this stuff. And if you have a good amateur background, it helps. But there's also involved the art part, and I call it the human game of chess, KJ, because you can get two guys in there. And Shoot Pro is so exciting to me because there are no stars right now. They got some names maybe from different things. We'll bring them together. But pretty soon you're going to say, hey, this guy's got 4 wins and no losses. And now next week he's going to be on the mat with this guy that's got 4 wins and no losses. Well, this is going to be great. Who do you think's going to win? And then it boils down to, well, who's the smartest? Who can play that human game of chess? Because it only takes a couple of seconds to break an arm and pop it.
Right?
I mean, professional submission wrestling is the most really physical, brutal, and dangerous one-on-one competition. Boxers got the best hands, but they got gloves,
Yeah.
and some other thing. But one-on-one, a submission wrestler who knows what he's doing will beat anybody on the mat. It's just the nature of the beast. Because
that's how you learn to shoot, and like you said, shoot doesn't.
John Foley, he was one of them. That taught me a lot of stuff. And then there was Billy Robinson in the AWA that showed me some stuff. And again, the science, but the human anatomy, how to grip right. If you grip your wrist with 2 fingers, your hand bone stretches out like a Y.
Well, Ross knows about all that stuff.
Yeah, if you hook it right, someone's hand, nobody can break it. And if you know the anatomy of the human neck, if you bend it the right way and pop it, it don't take maybe 10 pounds of pressure. You broke someone's neck. So it's an art and a science to shoot pro. And I'm excited because it hasn't been around in its real form for thousands of years.
Well, my question is, how is it different than MMA? Let's tell them.
MMA is what you got. You got a bunch of tough guys, too. I'm a big Brock Lesnar fan. He was wrestling and an amateur in MMA. But what the MMA guys do is, like the karate guy, they concentrate on different things. Punching, because you can punch and kick in the UCF and the MMA. So you got punching, you got kicking, and then you try to hold the guy down and hook him if you can get him down. But that also involves a lucky punch where someone not good might win, or a lucky low blow kick. But what a submission wrestler does is he doesn't waste any time on that punching, kicking. He's putting 100% of his mental ability and effort to the real art and science of submission wrestling. You can be the best boxer in the world. Submission wrestlers just going to take you down to the mat and break something. Because that's what they do.
Exactly. And, it all comes down, KJ, to the rules. In the MMA and the UFC, there's no pin. That's one big difference. And they knee, punch, kick, elbow. So with the shoot pro, and to Larry's point, I like to call it pure wrestling. It's the purest form of wrestling, because in scholastic wrestling, you have points and you have a lot of rules. When I was in high school, I used to be able to use a bow and arrow, which is a technique that now coaching now I know they don't allow in high school. So they've changed the rules and they've taken out a lot of the stuff that, and of course,
bow and arrow is a move in wrestling, correct? You got to remember,
bow and arrow,
like wrestling for dummies. But
that's just one. I just use that as an example.
Okay, just checking.
The reason I say that, KJ, is because it's still taught. And I was at coaching at a tournament recently where a kid had a bow and arrow, and they call it a dangerous position now, and they used to let you use it to pin. It's a way to stretch a guy and pin him. You can do your arm locks, you can do your toe holds, you can do your chokes. It's all submission. So it's the purest form of wrestling because everything is allowed, and you have the pin and the submission.
Let me just add one thing directed to your question, KJ, and what Larry and the King are saying is completely relevant. But I want you to understand something. So, UFC is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It's such a great show. But there are what I see some limitations in what Shoot Pro does to mitigate the limitations. Every UFC you watch, it's the same match with different athletes.
Yeah.
It's always the guys enter the ring. You win with a punch or a submission, a knockout or a submission, and then that's it. Well, that's like boxing. It's the same boxing match every time, but with different characters. Shoot Pro is like pro wrestling. We have tag teams, we have cage matches, we have singles matches, we have three-way single-man tag. We have all these variations, so it's more of a variety show. But what you have to understand is that this Shoot Pro, even though it looks like pro wrestling on the outside, on the inside, it's like the UFC because it is very brutal. It's very tough. And if you look right now, statistically speaking, the number one predictor of being a champion in the UFC is an amateur wrestling background. That is the number one common thing. But what we're doing is we're taking the most dangerous athlete in the UFC and exclusively selecting for them and saying, you're going to enter into this ring with this guy. Now, the good news is he can't punch or kick you.
Okay, sorry.
He can't punch or kick you. But just like UFC has two ways to win, a knockout or a submission, we have a pin or a submission. And to me, a pin is so much more of a higher level of sophistication because, to make somebody tap out or to knock somebody out, that shows control. But if I could control you without even harming you and hold you helpless like a little baby in a cradle, who's the man and who's the baby?
Yeah, and the other thing that's so key to the pin, KJ, is it makes it more exciting for the fans. And when I say that, when you get a chance, watch some of the Gracie grappling events.
And, the old Gracie, like back, you're talking like in the early years of the Gracies.
No, I'm talking about like just any kind of no-gi grappling event. It could put you to sleep because there's so much work off the back, laying and praying. Whereas when you have the pin in there, this is the thing I want to stress, and that's why I tell people go to shootprowrestling.com and watch the matches. It's totally different because it forces the action. Because if you're on your back, you got to get that shoulder up, or you're going to get pinned and you're going to lose. So it forces the action. And then something else that's very near and dear to me personally, KJ, and you know I've lost some close friends, Stephan Bonner being one who I brought into Shoot Pro. Yeah. UFC Hall of Famer, dear friend of mine, broadcast partner of mine, the CTE. The TBI. I mean, I had a cup of coffee in MMA. I would have never done it as a career because of the damage that I see people have. And so many people whose names you don't know. I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but that had way too many fights and they're not functional in society anymore.
You're right.
I'm an older guy now and I'm eloquent and astute, erudite, but like I said, I just only competed in that handful of times. The people who did that over time, their brain become that CTE, TBI is such a real thing. And the great thing that I like about this is that this is a way for competitors, for wrestlers, as we build and grow this, to make money without those same risks to their brain. Because once you lose your brain, your brain power, you're not functioning.
That is a huge problem. People don't.
It's going to. And let's be real here, okay? The UFC started in '93, and so it hasn't been around that long. You're already seeing a lot of issues with former competitors with domestic violence issues, dying. One of my best friends in the world Phil Baroni in a Mexican prison right now. I think he was a patsy, but I think it was a patsy because his brain was gone. He was just down there, you know.
There you're
It's
back.
it's a sad. I don't want to bring the mood down here, but it's sad to see friends in that state, and that's why I'm so excited when I started talking to Jake. It's been 3 years ago, over 3 years ago now, and about the Shoot Pro. One of the first things I said to him, because at that time the people that I mentioned were still alive and not in prison, and then as time progressed, this started happening. And Stephen Bonner, who I brought into the company, who's passed on now, and it became personal to me that I said, "This, I want to build this. I want to grow this. I want to see people be able to make money in combat sports without the brain damage."
Yeah.
And
so this Shoot Pro will alleviate that brain. I mean, hey, I'd rather break an arm, break a leg, pull my arm, do the bow and arrow on me than have
exactly. And there's more skill involved. And I want to stress this. There is no style of grappling, whether it's the old school shooters, that submission wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, nothing where in grappling where you can punch people in the head on the ground.
Actually, I really like that.
And that's what causes the CTE, TBI. And I know a lot of people may disagree with me. They're big fans of UFC. I'm not a fan of UFC anymore. I don't even watch it anymore. I'm excited about Shoot Pro, and I'm really excited about what we're doing.
So anything, I mean, if this protects athletes in their brains a little more, then I'm all for it too, because I agree with you. I don't even know wrestling like you do, and I have, like Dan the Beast Severns and all them. I mean, they advocate about all this brain damage and the suicide,
it's so funny.
drinking, crime rate.
You just said that. That's so funny. 3 or 4 days ago, I was talking to Dan. You know, Dan's a dear friend of mine, and I was telling Dan my idea, which I've said to him before, about no punching on the ground in MMA. And he said, you've said that to me so many times. He said, do you tell the promotions you work with and the gyms you work with and coach with that?
You just had Dan in the magazine.
Yeah, because Dan agreed. Dan, and I'll tell you, Dan agrees with me.
Magazine.
Dan agrees with me, and the reason why Dan is lucid and has his brain is because of the way he used his wrestling. He fought very smart, and he had a lot of fights, a ridiculous amount of fights. But I mean, that's just something that, to me, and Jake knows this, it's personal, and that's why I love what we're doing with Shoot Pro Wrestling.
Well, Ross's son actually is a wrestler in high school, so. Like you can relate to a lot of this, Ross, and the damage that happened.
My son is crushing it in high school. He's built like Bruce Lee. He's right now 26-4. Like for this season, he's just like destroying everybody.
And he wants a career in wrestling. Like you know what I mean? And I worry about that. So this actually might be by the time he gets through college, this could actually be a big thing and a big avenue for kids like him to go into.
Well, it's funny because that like for somebody who really excels in amateur wrestling, which is known as folk style or scholastic wrestling in the United States, there have not been places for them to go other than like what Larry did. Larry was a top collegiate wrestler, and then he had to go, if he wanted to continue, he had to go into theatrical wrestling, right? Yeah, I mean, and that's like you see Brock Lesnar, you see all these people go that route. Well, now UFC came and gave him another route. But I'm going to be real, and I think Larry can attest to this. I've done a little bit of pro wrestling, so is the King. I mean, relative to what Larry's done, but pro wrestling is very dangerous. Like the theatrical pro wrestling, very dangerous. UFC, you end up with concussions. We offer now a third path where people can really be the baddest, toughest guy on the planet and still have their wits about them when they're Larry's age.
No, thank you.
I gotta tell you, when I watched WWE and WWF, and I watched some of the wonderful things that you gentlemen do, and no matter what anybody says, when somebody jumps off the turnbuckle and gets air and hits that mat. Kapow! I don't care how much padding. That's gotta hurt, man.
Dude, you can hit the mat from 3 feet and it hurts, dude. Everything hurts.
And let me interject here because it's so relevant to what we're doing with Shoot Pro. If you watch any of Larry's matches, Larry was so smooth, was great in the ring. He's wrestling. The marquee says wrestling. When I did pro wrestling, I brought a lot of kids that I was coaching from amateur wrestling to be my opponents, and then I brought guys from the MMA world like Stephan Bonner and Phil Baroni, Kamal Chalarus, and we always stole the show, just like Larry did, and that's because we wrestled, and we wrestled in and out of holds, and we made it what it says on the marquee, which is wrestling. And in our case, it was pro wrestling because it was a predetermined outcome, even though we were shooting a bit, going in and out of stuff in the matches, but we always stole the show because people want to see wrestling. That flying Walinda act, the trapeze act, the gymnastics, once you've seen it, it gets old. That's not what people want. People want wrestling. Like I said, on that marquee, it does not say stunt show. It does not say freak show. It does not say burlesque show. It says wrestling. And Shoot Pro Wrestling is bringing people pure, real wrestling.
I gotta admit, I'm liking this. I am kind of liking that, because...
Of you three gentlemen, all three of you three gentlemen, did any of you actually take the martial arts? And if you did, which one did you take, and why did you do that?
Well, I did.
Ooh.
You know what I did? I mean, when I was, like I said, go 7th, 8th grade in Pittsburgh, I started with the amateur, wrestling, which in Pennsylvania was one of the few states that had it in high school, that young. And then between wrestling seasons, I would take martial arts to learn more about whatever I could about fighting and wrestling and that involved punching and kicking. The style I took was a style called Isshinryu. And I believe the master's name was Shimabuku. You're going back to the 60s now. But yeah, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it was an Okinawan style called Isshinryu, which was a hard style, not like Taekwondo. It was a direct. But it definitely helped because, even the way you throw a punch, you don't keep your hand straight, you could hurt your wrist. You bend it a bit, so you got that straight bone you hit with these 2 knuckles. Bam! Now, anyway.
That was an excellent question.
Now, when you were Larry, when you were in the ring, there was a decent amount of time where you wore a martial arts gi and went in with a pair of nunchucks.
Well, you know what I did? Yeah, because to get a black belt, they had a kata you had to do with some kind of weapon. I think bows and sais were most of the weapons in Isshinryu, but I liked the nunchucks because I could take it in a plane with me, put it in my suitcase. Because before that, you could walk on a plane with a gun in your bag. There was no TSA years ago. So I took that, and what I would do is I'd be in the shower like before my match a little bit, and I'd be swinging the nunchucks, and I had a heavier pair. And it would loosen me up. So I'd swing the chucks and loosen me up, and I put the gi on at a time against Bockwinkel when Vern was kind of trying to compete with the WWE. And I know Bockwinkel, they tried to make like the guy from the Raiders of the Lost Ark. He had the whip, and then Greg Gagne was coming out of a river with a knife in his mouth. They tried to make Greg Gagne Rambo, and capitalize. But Vern was walking by the shower and saw me in there swinging these things, and he says, "What the hell is that?" And I said, "Well, these are nunchucks. It's a karate martial arts weapon." "A weapon? That's what I'm talking about." So then Vern asked me if I'd come in wearing the gi and swinging the chucks, and it wasn't. I didn't plan it, but that's how it happened.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah, that is very interesting story.
Yeah,
I remember Larry was.
I got a million of them.
Larry was awesome with those nunchucks. I remember that. And I have a funny story too with his question. I started doing judo back in the 90s, mid 90s, when I was in college. And that was when wrestlers were dominating judo, because you could attack the legs with your hands, from a standing position. And they took that out to get the wrestlers out of judo. And it was actually in doing judo in Connecticut in the summers in Danbury that I ended up, I always wanted to be a pro wrestler, and I had no idea how to do it. And this guy, Dave, that I was in judo class with, he was going to a school which was run by an old timer, Killer Kowalski. Yeah. And he was going up to the school, and I never went to school to learn how to be a pro wrestler. I was just an amateur wrestler and did some judo, and he took me around as his opponent. So that's how I got my feet wet with doing the indie pro wrestling. And I always did it for fun. Never like Larry. Larry was a world champion legend. I always did it for fun on the side. And then when I was coaching wrestling, I would bring guys up, to be my opponents from the team, like coach, other high school coaches that was assistant coach with me, Steve Volponi, and we had a blast doing it. And that's why, I so much believe everything that we're talking about here tonight, the UFC, the pure wrestling, the pro wrestling. Shoot pro wrestling, in my mind, is the absolute perfect mix of all of that, because it's the purest form of wrestling. And I'm really excited about Vegas this weekend.
Well, we definitely have to have a follow-up show. I really want to hear about how the whole weekend went and all that good stuff, and actually get Larry to talk more. And
good.
I want to hear if Jake took any martial arts. You're muted, Jake. You're muted.
Oh, Jake, you're muted.
Sorry about that. There we go. So, real briefly, I started as a peewee wrestler when I was about 4 years old, 1977. So I started at about 4, and I did that for a while. And it's funny because it was actually my mom got me into wrestling because my grandpa, who was a farmer in Nebraska, was watching AWA wrestling. So he was probably watching Larry and Billy Robinson and all these guys, and that kind of inspired my grandpa to push my mom to put me into wrestling. Well, wrestling, I hate to say it, guys, it's so cool now. It's the coolest thing in my life. But when I was a kid, it wasn't cool. What was cool was the Karate Kid. Yeah. And when I saw the Karate Kid, I was like, dude, I dropped wrestling. And I went and I ended up getting my black belt by the time I was like 15. Now, mind you, that was in your typical kind of strip mall dojo type of thing in Denver at a place called Mile High Karate. And then as soon as I went to college, I did just like the King. I went into judo. And because I had this black belt and I had a roommate, and I thought I was hot shit because I was a young man with a black belt. Well, my college roommate, had a green belt in judo, and he got sick of hearing me run my mouth. And he said, let's go out in the backyard. I said, okay, let's go. And man, it was an education that day. He grabbed me and threw me 17, 20 times. I was like, shit. The next day I was down at the YMCA, signed up for judo. And I started doing judo, and at that exact same time, kind of cosmically, I was in Colorado. I was going to University of Colorado Boulder. The UFC had its first 2 shows in Denver, and I went live. And I'm in judo, and then I see Hoist Gracie do what he did. I was like, dude, this has changed my life. I've got to figure this out. And so after graduating college, I went to California to study the jiu-jitsu stuff, only to come full circle within about 2 years, realizing as I'm doing this jiu-jitsu, all the wrestlers are beating all the jiu-jitsu guys. And then for the first time in my life, I realized wrestling was a martial art. And I went right back. I went right back into wrestling full bore, and, sought out guys like a guy Larry mentioned, Billy Robinson, who is one of those old Wigan catch-can shooter hooker type wrestlers. And I'd spent 7 years learning with Billy Robinson. Like I was his right-hand man for like 7 years. It was pretty brutal. And then after that, I hooked up with another guy that the King mentioned, Wade Chalice. So he's National Wrestling Hall of Fame for amateur wrestling. He holds the Guinness record for the most wins in all of wrestling and the most pins in all of competitive wrestling. He's also a 5 combat sport All-American. He was an All-American in judo, in sambo, in freestyle wrestling, folk style wrestling, and Greco-Roman. Wow. And he developed his own martial arts system, and he gave me a 3rd degree black belt, but I don't even know what that means, to be honest. So I guess my answer is yes, but I don't even know what that really means.
Well, you see, and the only reason why they said you were in the Pee Wee martial arts program is because the King was there in the class with you. And
everybody was Pee Wee compared to the King.
Everybody was Pee Wee, so, you know.
It's funny.
Matthew's the perfect announcer for you guys.
Yeah,
Harry.
It's funny because Jake and I were talking about this the other night. When we were in high school, there was no such thing as the UFC. The UFC has only been around for 32 years. But, and this is really where it gets interesting, there was in Japan before the UFC, Shuto. And that I mentioned I did a book with Eric Paulson, the Rough and Tumble book on the history of grappling. And a lot of fans don't understand that the UFC evolved out of professional wrestling, because Shuto was started by Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama, and it was all shoots, hence the name Shuto.
Well, it all goes to Carl Gotch, right? Because there was Carl Gotch, who Larry knows who this guy is, another guy who trained in Wigan, another shooter. Carl was just notorious for not really liking the theatrical wrestling and always trying to do real wrestling. And he got blacklisted in the United States and had to go to Japan to work to make a living. Well, he influenced all these Japanese wrestlers to start doing shooting. Like Matt mentioned, Shuto is how the Japanese would say shoot. And then there was also Pancrase, which is like Frank Shamrock. Frank Shamrock's going to be at CATCHCON this weekend, and he was the king of Pancrase, not the king of Connecticut, but the king of Pancrase. And he both Pancrase and Shuto were the first MMA before the UFC, and both developed by Carl Gotch.
So to explain it to the fans or don't know, they see UFC now, which is this huge company. I'm really good friends with Art Davie. Art's the guy who started UFC back in the day, and how he started it. He looked at what was going on in Japan, and Jake mentioned an organization called Pancrase. Well, what happened was there was a promotion called UWFI in Japan, and they were a professional wrestling promotion with Funaki, Suzuki, and all these Japanese guys, and there were so many shooters. They were loaded with shooters, and their matches looked a lot more real. But they were, like I said, when I did pro wrestling, I always brought in, amateur wrestlers and MMA guys to be my opponents, and we made the matches look real. That's what they did. It was a work, right? Because the finish was work. But then Funaki and Suzuki, they got so frustrated with it being a work, and they said, you know what? We're going to start this organization called Pancrase, which was another professional wrestling organization, and it's going to be all shoots. You keep hearing that name, shoot.
Yeah, no, I know what it means now. You know what I mean? I'm a wrestler.
I'm gonna go way back in a minute. But before I go way back, I'm going to say in the early UFCs, you had Royce Gracie in that UFC 1. Mm-hmm. And then you had Ken Shamrock Ken Shamrock was a professional wrestler in the American Southeast, and Dean Malenko showed him a tape of this UWFI. He ended up going to Japan and pro wrestling with UWFI, and then transitioning over to compete for Pancrase, which was the shoot promotion. And he was one of the stars in the early UFCs, one of the top 3 stars, right? Your biggest stars were Royce Gracie, Dan Severn, and Ken Shamrock, right? Ken Shamrock was king of Pancrase. He was Pancrase champion. That was a professional wrestling promotion, a shoot professional wrestling promotion, okay? Dan Severn, NWA world champion. He was a professional wrestler. Really good friend of mine, Dan the Beast, and he had wrestled it for UWFI. He never went over to Pancrase. So, again, I always look at UFC from its early days, and I've said this to Art Davey, and he agrees, UFC as a professional wrestling promotion. If you really study the history, UFC is a professional wrestling promotion. Most fans don't understand that. Now, I'm going to go way back. Larry Zbyszko, if we go back and we look at Elio Gracie, who's the patriarch of the Gracie family, and I want to educate your audience here. He competed against Władek Zbyszko, who was a professional wrestler of his time, and Władek absolutely decimated Elio in that match, brutalized him. But Elio wouldn't give up, wouldn't tap out.
Well, you know what the funny bit was? Stanislaus Zbyszko was the one that was more well-known, more famous, had a bigger name. But Władek Zbyszko, his brother, he was the one that was the real top-notch shooter. Stanislaus was tough, but Władek was tougher.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get a little deeper here and take you a little further down the rabbit hole. Okay, so you hear the name Kimura used in MMA. Watch any UFC broadcast, and you'll hear the broadcasters call it a Kimura. It's a side double wrist lock. Why do they call it a Kimura? Because Japanese professional wrestler Kimura used that move to break Elio Gracie's arm when they competed. Okay?
Yeah,
now let me take you even further back down the rabbit hole. Okay? Who taught the Gracies? Who taught the Gracies? The Gracie family was taught by Count Koma, Mitsuyu Maeda, who was a professional wrestler, catch wrestler in the shoot days of professional wrestling, and a judoka. He had tons of professional wrestling matches.
From
Why did he teach the Gracie family? Take you further down the rabbit hole. We talked about the carnivals. Why did he teach the Gracie family and what people now call jiu-jitsu? He taught the Gracie family because the Gracie family ran the carnivals in Brazil. So now you understand, if you listen to that, if you follow that, and I urge you to read the Rough and Tumble book.
Interesting. That is so interesting.
That's why
we got to have another interview next week after all this, because
that's why we are.
Dick's got to go. So
yeah. But that's where wrestling came from. When television started, wrestling came from the circus to TV because everything was live.
But didn't Barnum Bailey Circus have actually do wrestling once in a while too?
Yes, I knew it. P.T. Barnum had a shooter named Ed Decker, who was that he used, and he would actually take on people from the crowd. That was it was like a carny game, and take their money. So they had sticks
and take their money.
So in other words, the sticks would be in the crowd and might give a tough match, to the wrestler, but it was a work to get the fans to pay, to bet, because they thought they could beat this guy. And that's where the shooters came from, out of the carnies. And I mentioned, having the honor of being mentored by two of those guys, myself, Billy Wicks, and Frankie Kane. So this is history that not a lot of people know. And it's, you don't have to just
guys, hold on, Matt. Yeah. Let's not give him the cow. Let's just give him a glass of milk. Because unfortunately, I've got to run, and I'm very sorry, guys, but I my schedule is absolutely nuts.
Well, exactly. We want to I say, here's what we do. Okay, let's end this, plug everything, and then after the event, let's have another sit down. We should start doing this more often.
That sounds good.
History. Right?
After
Larry, you got history that, I'm up now. I feel like I'm all broken,
Well, after the event, I'd love to talk about it.
Because we can review what happened at the event.
Yeah.
Let's do a recap. Let's do a recap of the event. We're really
all right,
excited.
So everyone, plug your website, plug everything before Ross signs us off.
Okay, like Matt said, shootprowrestling.com is the place to go to see it. It has the rules, the roster, old matches. You can see so much stuff. It's really cool. Also, if you want to, if you're crazy like the old carnies, come and take my money. $1,000. You can show up in Vegas.
Wow.
CATCHCON. CATCHCON.us is the website. CATCHCON.us.
So anyone can just show up this weekend and say, I want to try and win that $1,000?
Yeah, you got to put up. You got to put a little bit of money down, but you put down $250. You put down $250. You get 3 matches, best of 3, and then you also get a chance to enter into the tag team tournament as well. You can find a partner there. You could walk away with $1,500.
Wow.
So come and bet on yourself.
Good time in Sin City. All right,
and
Matthew.
Vegas. We're literally 7 minutes off the strip, and you get to hang out with all the legends: Frank Shamrock, Wade Chalice, Pat Miletich is going to be in on Zoom. We got Joe Malenko. For those of you who know Dean Malenko, his older brother. So yeah, thank you so much, KJ. Thank you guys
Ross,
so much.
don't forget Ross. Ross and I are power team.
Ross, I was going to call you Russ just to make things even, but I'm going to stick with Ross.
Thanks.
And Matthew, my old partner, from 8 years ago, Matthew. I just love Matthew, and unless he's lifting up a ring girl, then I don't love him anymore. But as long as he doesn't do that,
so much, KJ.
okay.
KJ, it was absolutely a pleasure, and thank you to the living legend, Larry.
Yes,
Zbyszko,
Larry, we will have you on
Ross
next
and
week
Jake.
too.
Yes, anytime you want. You guys been great.
You guys, this has been fun. All right, Ross, why don't you sign us off?
And there's more to know about too.
Yeah, no, we're gonna have like a weekly or bi-weekly, talk fest. This is fun.
I can't wait to see this weekend. I'll be there.
Right, I can't wait to see you either. And we'll recap next week. And all right, Ross, sign us off.
What a great episode with family, friends, and fans. We were so blessed to have Jake Shannon in the house. We had the King of Connecticut in the house. And we certainly, by no means, should ever forget that we had our friend, Larry Zbyszko. So we are hoping to see you back in the studio real soon. What a great interview.
Got the bow and arrow.
Gentlemen, you are a blessing.
Thank you,
guys.
Bye.
Have a good one.